have no idea if that's in frame, but there we go. Perfect. Anyway, so I have a clacker now, and the movie we are reviewing on the Mr. Shades show is Spider-Man: Far From Home, the latest Marvel film, the latest Spider-Man movie, and the first Marvel movie after Endgame. That's a pretty big thing. This movie was touted as being the end cap to to this phase of Marvel movies, and they're going forward. I don't really think it works as an end cap. This feels more like the start of the phase, whereas Endgame, well, ended it. This feels like the start of the next phase, but Spider-Man, directed by John Watts. So this movie is a awkward rom-com slash road trip comedy with a Spider-Man movie mixed in. It's interesting concept. I'll give him that. Continues on building on some of the things from that we saw in Homecoming, like the teen drama, stuff like that. It builds onto that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Usually they don't do that in sequels. They don't repeat some of that elements like that. So this is the sequel. It's definitely doing everything a sequel does. It makes the story bigger, the action bigger, everything like that. So, did I like it? Yes. Do I have problems with it? Yes. This movie is really... if you're into the MCU and like you really have to see every movie, do it. If you're not that big into the MCU, but you like Spider-Man, go see it. But if you are more of a casual fan, you could probably skip this one. It's good, but it's not like you have to go see it. It's very much, again, like a Captain Marvel, but which is good, I think, because we didn't need it to be a big bombastic movie. We just needed it to be the Spider-Man movie sequel. It just needed to be okay. So in this movie, Spider-Man goes on a road trip to Europe with his classmates. Shenanigans ensue. People almost finding out stuff, him almost getting caught, him getting stuff like that. Your typical Spider-Man stuff happens. Although I will say they really harp on the Tony Stark element. They really do that quite a bit, which is fine. And like they put him in, but putting him in the background of like every single shot almost, or every single scene in some way, was almost a little too much for me anyway. Like, it's Spider-Man. At this point you kind of want to see him grow beyond that. Like, you want him to be Spider-Man, not Tony Stark, not Iron Spider. You want him to be himself. So I kind of had a problem with that. The story was really well written, really well put together, and if you don't have any comic book knowledge, then you're gonna like this movie. You're gonna like what it does. But if you do have comic book knowledge, you're already going in knowing what's going to happen. Granted, there are some surprises in the film that I think a lot of people will enjoy. But again, like, the whole story hinges on how much you actually know about Spider-Man. And me being a comic book guy, going in, I was already like, okay, there's only so much you can do. Granted, it was very creative. Some of the things they did with Mysterio, you know, like his whole shtick was really good. Like, he was the best part of this movie. But I don't think he was as good as the Vulture. I just like Michael Keaton's performance that much better as the Vulture as opposed to Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. And it's also more impressive to Michael Keaton pulling off the Vulture in the MCU. Like, that is something very impressive in itself. But this is more... But I won't talk about him anymore. This is for Spider-Man: Far From Home. I don't want to talk too much about the spoilers because whatever. Usually, when I usually do one of these reviews, it's usually a bad movie or an old movie, so spoilers don't really matter all that much. Anyway, so visually, this movie is great. Like when Spider-Man's doing his thing, it looks good. You can follow everything. Like it's definitely better here than it was in Homecoming. A lot of bits, things like that. The Spider-Man aspects, like the web slinging and his fighting, a lot better in this movie, and it just shows through the direction, the choreography, all that. Everything is just better here, but that comes with a few problems that I have with the characters and some of the humor. They just kind of harp on the same jokes over and over. Like they really overuse certain jokes. Pardon me. It's a little bit hard to do, but I think they did pretty well. And I don't usually review MCU movies because it usually turns into just everybody spoiling everything. Nobody really talks about it because these MCU movies, they all hit this standard, the Marvel standard, which is good, at least good. You have some that kind of dip below that, but that was in the Iron Man 2, Thor 2, in there where it just kind of dipped below that standard, but this one hits that standard. It's like Captain America: First Avenger, all those where it's not great, but it's just good enough. And that is kind of a standard that this movie hits, and that's all it really needed to do considering what it's following. Like what came before it in the movies. So all the acting was great. Ned is back, and he's Ned, so he's always awesome. They build on some other characters that are in the previous movies. See, I'm just stumbling here because I'm trying not to talk too much about spoilers because this movie came out 2 days ago now. So, would I recommend this movie? Like I said, if you're a Spider-Man fan, MCU fan, do it. It's worth it. But, like, if you're a comic book guy, and especially a Spider-Man comic book guy, you're going in knowing what's going to happen, but they do it so well that it is worth it in every way possible. If you think too much about the story, it kind of starts to fall apart a little. So, but that kind of falls more into like nitpicking. So the writing isn't as strong in this one as it was in Homecoming. But it's a good sequel. It's a very good sequel. And that's all that I think we all expected was Far From Home to be really good. Or not really good, but good. Like, when I first saw the trailers, I was like, oh, okay, this one I might skip, but I'm glad I didn't. It was really good. And so my final rating for Spider-Man Far From Home. I think I'm going to have to give it a 7 out of 10. For characters, the action, there was some really cool creative moments in it that are awesome. Visual effects are good. The story and the writing wasn't quite as tight as Homecoming, so that's where it loses a few points for me. Like, it was enjoyable, but the moment you start to think about it too much, it begins to fall apart. So, and if you already know what's going to happen with the character of Mysterio, if you know him, you know what's going to go down. But it does surprise you enough that I think it is worth seeing. So I think that's going to do it for my review of Spider-Man Far From Home. Usually I have Zach with me here, so we get a couple different opinions in here, but this time, unfortunately, he was not able to join us or join me. He's working nights all day and all that. He's working nights all week, so it's hard to get him out other than the weekend. But other than that, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.